Welcome back to Holistic Healing with Lori podcast. Today we are going to be talking about CIRS. Now, this is also known as mold toxicity, mold illness, and it is getting to be bigger and bigger, more and more prevalent, partially because of other toxins that are in the environment, partially because of EMFs. All these things interact, and I'm having more and more clients and students who are dealing with this, whether it's on a really big scale, and they're currently dealing with mold in their living environments, in their houses and things like that, or whether they experienced mold exposure in the past and it's still there, right? And this happens for a lot of people. This was one of the final layers of my own illness experience and chronic symptoms experience. And it can be quite insidious. So let's talk about it. It's only been recognized for about 27 years now. It was first described by Dr. Richie Shoemaker that we know of in 1996. And because of that, a lot of physicians still don't know about this. But it's an illness that's usually developed after exposure to water damage, buildings or houses or workplaces or schools where water has come through either through broken pipes or a leaky roof or wherever. And what happens though is that we have a lot of paper in our building materials, whether that's in insulation or in sheetrock. And what happens is that if water gets into these building materials, within 24 to 48 hours, they actually start to grow mold bacteria at a really fast rate. So these become spore forms as well, and it starts making toxins also. And once it gets into the body, it's making toxins, and it can actually multiply itself by a factor that's in the thousands. And this is the same with bacteria as well. But you can get this with either this dampness or increased microbial growth. And some of these spores, these microbes, these mold spores actually as well, get into the air and you breathe them in. And then especially people who are genetically predisposed to mold illness, it actually ends up causing damage to what's called the innate immune system. So let's talk about this a little bit first, because this is not something, the innate immune system is not something that is really taught in medical schools. And most of the studies of immunology is about the adaptive immune system, right? About antibodies. And then you have a whole field of medicine called rheumatology, and that studies rheumatology, right? But these types of illnesses are not included in those immunology studies because this is not an allergic reaction. It doesn't have anything to do with antibodies. This has to do with the innate immune system. When the innate immune system starts to act in its not natural way, in a, I hate to use the word broken, but what happens is that your regulatory chemicals, and these are the chemicals in the body that regulates a particular system so that it works properly. And what we're talking about here is that you have two chemicals in your body that regulate your innate immune system to make sure that it doesn't stay too high too long, right? You might know that when our immune system stays too high too long, we end up dealing with inflammation. We end up dealing with autoimmune issues, all those kinds of things. One of those chemicals that we're talking about here is called MSH, also known as alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone. Now, the other is called vasoactive intestinal peptide, which is one of the things that in the past has been used to help out with mold toxicity with CIRS. But what we're finding now is that it's not always the best option. But invariably, people who are dealing with CIRS, which by the way stands for, it's CIRS, and it is Chronic Inflammatory Response Syndrome. So typically people who are dealing with this are very low in MSH and VIP, or what we were talking about earlier. Because they're such low levels, they're no longer able to handle an activated, elevated immune system and to bring it back down to normal. So let's talk about this also in terms of Th1 and Th2. So in the immune system, your Th1 is what is typically doing the killing, right? So it can go in and find the pathogens and take care of them, or the toxins, right? Mycotoxins in this case, what we're talking about here with the CIRS, with the mold. And then you have your Th2, and these are supposed to be balanced. Th2 is the one that comes in and causes your immune response and really amps up the immune system so that it's can be overactivated when it gets out of balance. And this is what happens in most people who are dealing with really any kind of chronic symptoms. The Th2 is too high, and it's actually Th2/Th17. And the Th1 gets really low. So the immune system is constantly activating. We've got the inflammation going on here, and it just gets tired too, right? So the Th1 just gets tired. So the issue, though, is that the immune system, the Th1, is not able to come in and take care of what needs to be taken care of. So the immune system is just constantly looking for stuff, but not being able to take care of it. So this is one of the first things that we need to take care of, and I'll talk about that in just a bit here. But when you're dealing with a compromised immune system from mold, in this case, you might just be noticing some small chronic symptoms, or maybe you don't even notice any symptoms at all, right? But then when we have what I call a big storm come along, something like a flu, something like COVID, any kind of viral infection, or even a bacterial infection, or even a stressful event, or a lot of small stressful events that build up over time, if your innate immune system is already messed up, and then you have these invaders coming in, or parasites, then your immune system is going to ramp up and cause your body to make cytokines. And you may have heard of cytokine storms before, right? In relation probably to COVID and to other invaders. And the cytokines are good. They go throughout the body and they try to destroy all the invaders, whatever that is. But the issue is that the body's immune system is not able to regulate these cytokines. And once you get rid of that invader, the virus or the bacteria, the immune system needs to come back down to normal because you've been elevated, right? And you're creating, the immune system is creating the inflammation in the body. But again, if that Th2, Th1 is not balanced, then it just stays up in Th2. This is also related to the cell danger response. And you can take a look at one of my other episodes that explains that in more detail. So let's take a look at this, right? You have the mold exposure. Your innate immune system gets out of whack, meaning that other things are imbalanced as well, but especially that Th2, Th1 ratio there, that balance. And then when you get hit with a big storm, then the immune system kicks in and it stays there. And that's when we're seeing these chronic inflammatory response syndromes, the CIRS, or CIRS, however you want to pronounce it. I've heard it pronounced lots of different ways. So that's where your overactive immune system is coming from. Now, the other thing to consider is that typically when there is mold present in the body, typically when there are any chronic symptoms, there are also usually parasites. There are also usually fungus. There are also usually these other hidden infections in addition to the mold. So you've got this poor immune system that's just scrambling around trying to take care of this stuff, but it's stuck in the part of the immune system that's not able to take care of them. And not only that, but the body at this point is overloaded by toxins and by pathogens. I think you can see probably how this is a continual cycle that keeps people in this highly inflammatory state and keeps people in CIRS, right? A lot of times what happens in my HEAL program, it's the HEAL Advanced Recovery Program, and we have a lot of people in there who do have long hauler syndrome, who have been diagnosed or self-diagnosed very smartly with chronic fatigue syndrome or myalgic encephalopathy or fibromyalgia. And we typically find that people start to make some small positive shifts within the first several months. If they haven't made some of those small positive shifts within the first several months or within many months, typically mold is involved, right? Whether it's that and this is one of the first things that we actually have people take a look at is, hey, do you think that there's a chance that you have mold in your place that you're living right now? Because if so, that is going to keep your body from healing. Because when our body is dealing with trying to heal things that are still coming into it, then it's not able to take care of the things that have already built up inside of it, right? It's just scrambling. So this is super important to take a look at. Now, if somebody has already had a mycotoxin test, then that's great. Go ahead and show that to me. I don't require for you to take a mycotoxin test. Again, if you've gotten through the program to a certain point and things still aren't starting to shift for you, then we do take a look at that. And possibly it might be a good idea for you to get a mycotoxin test. But we just find that we don't address mold until further on in the course, except for making sure that you're not living in it, right? But we don't address it until later on, after you've gone through some other protocols first, because for most people, not for everybody, but for most people, if you try to address it first, you're doing yourself a disservice. We want to remember earlier, I was talking about how parasites are typically there if mold is there. I would say 98% of the time, if your body is dealing with mold, then you have parasites as well. And so we want to start getting rid of those parasites, the larger parasites first, before we start addressing mold, because mold is inside. Those larger parasites go and scoop up mold and heavy metals and other things like that. So there's a certain order that we want to take it in. Now, I mentioned a peptide earlier, and this particular peptide called VIP I think it's starting to shift, but it was used fairly often in peptide therapy for people with CIRS, with mold toxicity. What we're finding now is that there's a possibility that particular peptide can give some people a boost for a short-term time, but in the long term, it can actually hinder healing, can hinder long-term healing. But the good news is that there are other protocols, that there are other peptides as well, and protocols, other additional things that we bring in to our mold protocol with the HEAL Advanced Recovery Program that is safe and is not going to hinder long-term healing. So again, we do this in a particular order in the program, and I go through that more in other episodes. I do want for you to know that if you are dealing with CIRS, if you're dealing with mold toxicity, that first of all, it is tough. I get that. So the absolute first thing that you want to do is get yourself out of that environment. Get yourself into a mold-free, safe environment for so many reasons. I already mentioned that your body's having to deal with fighting that off and with all the toxins that it's creating inside the body, but it's also causing your body to go into fight, flight, freeze, right? It's actually affecting your nervous system when you are physically in a moldy environment. So that's your first and foremost step. And then depending on where you are, where your body is, there are some different approaches that we have in the Heal Advanced Recovery Program before we full on address the mold. So for more information about the Heal Advanced Recovery Program, we'll include a link to more information about that below. And in the meantime, like I said, just know that this is not an impossible thing. You can get through this, and we're here to support you as much as possible. Please, if you know anyone who is dealing with this type of illness, CIRS, or a mold-related illness, if you know that they've had mold exposure recently, or even way in their past. For me, it was childhood and teenager, and then off and on throughout the rest of my life, but not recently. But it was definitely an issue. So just keeping that in mind. So please do share this with other people, let them know, and yeah, let us know if you have any questions. All right, lots of love.